Earlier today at this venue, President Mahama launched what he called a critical policy direction for the next 3 months of his government. And Mr. P.V. Obeng was the chairman of the occasion, and he has graciously granted us an interview in the same venue just hours after the event, so that we can sort of interrogate some of the issues that were addressed here. Mr. P.V. Obeng, good evening. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And I'm sure you are quite relaxed. Coming from what was a very successful Congress in Kumasi and your speech on the campaign platform, you must be reeling on very high. You must be on the high.
Well, we all who went to Kumasi came back happy for many reasons. And I think now it's opened the door for us to go to the next lap of our action towards 2012. And I think I'm as happy like everybody else to get on with the job.
President Mahama is serving the unexpired term of President Mills. And President Mills was big on policy right from the campaign before 2008. He had a Better Ghana agenda, and we have seen banners and posters around saying that there's a continuation of the Better Ghana agenda. So this morning's event about a critical policy, direction, was it an emphasis on what President Mills has been doing? Was it to give us a clear picture of what President Mills has been doing for the last 3 years? Or what really was it? Or was it to make President Mahama fill the airspace for the next 48 hours?
Obviously not the latter. If Professor Mills, our former president, was big on policy, one can say that President John Mahama was just as strong on policy as he was, because he was his co-pilot in the presidency, driving those policies that were developed at the beginning of the government of Professor Mills. He has demonstrated that there will be no shift in policy, and indeed he did not announce any new policies. The topic for his presentation today was critical policy actions. That clearly recognizes that there are other policy actions, out of which he had selected those ones that he talked about today, which he considered very critical. I'm not himself, but I think the reason he curled these out of the bulk of it is that he has seen that there was need to consolidate the gains derived from the policy that have been presented and implemented over the past 3 years. And studying through the litany of policies, he felt that those ones that he mentioned today were those that can deliver quickly results from the policy that they've implemented to bring benefit to the economy and to bring the benefit to service delivery to the people. And I think that was what he wanted to announce.
But they had been mentioned before. What he said this morning had been mentioned before. We've heard those policies before.
They had been mentioned before among many other policies. But today he took them out for special focus and emphasis, because he thought that those had the key for quick delivery of benefit to the people.
And he talked, let's pick some of them. He talked about government expenditure and said that the government was determined to break the cycle of expenditure, increase expenditure for non-budgeted items coming up in election year. How realistic is that? Because he's outlined some policy as critical, and there may be increased spending on some of those policies to hasten the completion of those policies ahead of December. And in an election year, there may be demands by the people which are in direction with development. How would he realistically sort of stay within budget?
Well, policies are delivered through activities, and activities are delivered through provision of resources in the budget. And I think what he meant to do was that the previous president gave instructions to his ministers and to other agencies not to go outside the budgetary confines of this year's expenditure outlay, because the work that they have done and the result they have achieved in maintaining sound macro policies were not to be sacrificed. I believe that the ministers took those instructions from the former president seriously. But for avoidance of doubt, the new president, President Mahama, wanted to refocus and re-emphasize the agency with which he wanted his ministers to adhere to that policy instructions. And this time around, he says he was going to hold every minister personally responsible for ensuring that they stay within brackets. He proceeded to say that next week he's going to hold a special cabinet meeting at which he was going to take stock of where things are in terms of expenditure, and to also get a report from the Minister of Finance on where things can be by the end of the year. By knowing where things are today and where things must be next year, it will be possible for him to give the nodal points of performance and be able to know when there will be disparities coming out of the expenditure pattern. And I think from what he said, he's going to crack the whip strongly if he sees that any sector is going out of instructions to spend more than his budget.
But shouldn't that assessment, that inventory been done before this event? Shouldn't he have met the ministers and looked at the situation and where we are and where we should have been? Shouldn't that sort of analysis and exercise be conducted before he meets the people and say to them that this is where we are?
He has done it. And I think you cannot overdo this in such circumstances. And the fact that he did it today in the presence of the public also is a way of managing public expectation. Because the public in the villages, in the towns, in the cities, in the sectors are those that demand extra benefit, extra development, which translate into extra expenditure. So when they hear the president say this to his ministers in the public domain, he's saying that the public must also curb the appetite for extra unbudgeted expenditures. And therefore, he's speaking to the two constituencies, both the demand side and the supply side. And I'm sure that with this, he should be able to expect that ministers and other spending agencies should develop the help scheme to be able to resist undue demand for consumption.
He didn't announce any sanctions on ministers that that will not adhere to it. Renegade, delinquent ministers, he didn't announce any sanctions. He said that I expect ministers to do that, but he didn't say if they don't do it, I shall do X, Y, Z. I
think towards the end, when somebody asks the questions, what will happen if it doesn't happen? He says they do that at their own peril. That is a loaded question. What constitutes peril for him and for the ministers, I'm sure, is best known to him and his ministers. But I think that he's made it abundantly clear that he will not take any abuse of that instruction lying down. And I do believe that we can take his word for it. After all, the ministers also are, excuse me to say, not small boys. And therefore, perhaps it will not be opportune to say in public what he intends to do with them. Each divergence may be necessitated by a particular necessity, and the response from him will also take an appropriate form. But that I leave to him because I'm not in the position.
On some of the figures, he talked about 5,000 jobs having been delivered in the last month, even as more job opportunities await Ghanaians in the oil and gas industry. That's going to create controversy, certainly. 5,000 jobs in a month, and that's in the sector of SADA.
Yes, he says so. It's a budgeted activity, well programmed, and it's a program that is even being managed by the private sector. And therefore, a certain amount of distance accountability exists in it. There's a contract between the SADA and the private sector entity to ensure that they plant 5 million trees within 12 months. The areas have been identified, the seedlings have been identified, the crop mix has been identified, the areas where these will be planted have been identified, and employment of agents and supervisory personnel have been identified. And with all these arrangements put in place, I do hope that we'll be able to meet that target. But I think that the program of planting 5 million trees by 5,000 persons over a 12-month period, if you deduce it, is something that is doable. And it is something that is pertaining particularly to the SADA zone. I'm also aware, indeed, that even in the non-SADA zones, the zones south, there's still a forest replantation project being managed by the Forestry Commission, where trees of commercial value, timber, is also being planted. I don't have enough information about that, but the number 5,000 that he spoke about excludes people that have been recruited, trained, and deployed in the forest zones of the southern sector to also do the same exercise.
In paragraph 63 of his presentation today, he said, ladies and gentlemen, and I quote, let me be clear in my vision, and this is on education. He says, I believe, as does most Ghanaians, that education is a right and must be free. Millions of Ghanaians, especially from the deprived families, got the benefits of free education during the First Republic and today are contributing meaningfully to the development of this nation. It goes on to say that the modalities of expressing this shared national vision of free education must first be to ensure that we improve efficiency and grassroots access to those who are in the system, etc., etc. Given that the main contender to President Mahama, Nana Akufo-Addo, has published a vision of free secondary education, is there a convergence of the two main candidates on free secondary education based on paragraph 63 of what President Mahama said today? He says that it is his belief that education is a right and it must be free.
Yes, the directing principle of state policy in the Constitution says there should be universal free education. It is a policy objective that the Constitution imposes on all of us, and therefore President Mahama is not free from that obligation, and anyone seeking to become a president cannot make himself free of that obligation. The question is that the attainment of that policy goal will emerge out of a process. It's not an event. And therefore, one has to map out a plan by which you get there. The choices are many for people who want to pursue, depending upon their political and ideological standpoints. If today there are only 5 or 10,000 people in the second cycle education sector, and you want to make it free for all of them, it will cost so much. What doing that for them would deny you from doing to other sectors of education must be computed. And that is what makes the route to the attainment of that goal credible, equitable, and therefore plausible or not. Currently, from the little knowledge I have of the education sector, I know that, for instance, not all graduates of the JSS system manage to get into second cycle education.
The majority of them don't.
Majority of them don't. And they are children. And some of them are even disqualified from joining the team that will be considered for access. Because it seems to me that the restriction of access has forced the examination authorities to tailor-make the examination result and marking system such that only a certain percentage can become eligible by their judgment to enter second cycle education. What do I mean by that? Perhaps if the grading system were probably altered to be a fair judgment on intelligence and performance, perhaps those who are gaining aggregate 6 today may be gaining aggregate 2 in some subjects. And therefore, I believe that itself is an inequity. We should judge people's progress and achievement in education in relation to their output. And therefore, we should not allow the restricted access to second cycle institutions to determine who we pass out as JSS graduates and who we don't. Even today, when we have stifled the access into the education through the examination corridor, we are not able to take more than 60% into second cycle. It's obviously something that is worrying. And parents must worry about this, because about 40% of the youth in that population group are going to be disenfranchised from education on account of lack of access. Is that what we want to have? So I believe that if we had the option, one would like to strengthen the base by providing that quality of education at the basic level.
The basic, primary and JSS.
JSS level, so that as many as are able to work hard and pass by normal judgment of its excellence should be able to pass through and then be able to get into the second cycle education as an exercise in democratic access to education. When they have all passed, or when many of them have passed as much as possible, and we are moving into the second cycle, and we are now talking about making it free, it's understandable. But
so we are not there yet. We're not at the free secondary education yet.
I don't think that it's an admirable objective, But I think that we cannot do that at the expense of strengthening the base level and increasing access from the base level into the second cycle.
So there's no convergence of the two candidates, free secondary education. You are saying that the policy underpin is in the Constitution and therefore obligatory.
It's obligatory.
But the MTP flag bearer says he's ready to do it now, and you are saying the NDC is looking at it in a broader sense.
We said we believe that there's a problem with doing it now at the cost that we are projecting, because doing that from the resource envelope available for education will have a negative impact at the basic level and perhaps also at the tertiary level. So I don't have any pathological opposition to the concept of free education at the secondary school level. But whether the time to do it is now, when we have those difficulties at the basic roots, is the issue that we need to contend with. And I think that all who have children or who have the interest of children of Ghana at heart will have to go down to the basic and see whether we believe that we have done enough at the basic level such that we can devote money from that level to the second cycle.
He also talked about one very important factor, which was going to be an election issue anyway, the judgment debt. And he sort of said that given all the information, some of the monies that had been paid out may not or should not have been paid. That's a statement in controversy, and given that some of it is in court and the people who have received the money, you know, the payees, like Alfred William is in court justifying that he ought to have been paid that money. We have heard the testimonies by former Attorney General Betty Modudristu justifying that construction pioneers deserve that money based on somebody's dereliction of duty, if you like. Now, is President Mahama saying that, is he indicating where he stands on judgment debt, that he's on the left of judgment debt?
I think he made the point very clear. He did not mention any particular cases because I'm sure he's conscious of the fact that commenting on matters that are in court will amount to him being guilty of commenting on the case sub judice. So he did not mention. But he says, looking back, and he's been in parliament, he's been in government as the deputy minister, he's been in government as the minister, he probably knows of some cases which he thinks perhaps could have been handled differently. And he says he's putting a mechanism in place to ensure that those in the pipeline don't fall into that kind of category, as we are dealing with for those that are already passed through the pipeline and now entering court adjudication. But then he went further to say that, it's important that we don't treat the symptoms of the malaise, but to treat the disease itself. So he's interested in sharing with the people knowledge about how these come about. People talk about it. People know about this. And people also know that sometimes contracts that are generally contracted are simply determined or cancelled on account of the political correlation of the one who held it in the era of a new political dispensation. And this is where he says the policy of winner takes all is objectionable to him. And I think I support him. So in looking at that situation, where we find that some of these cases have taken place because contracts are unilaterally determined without resort to the procedure that led him there, that should not happen. That is not acceptable. So he's even said that if there are cases waiting in the hands of people of that type who would like to also choose the same route of going to seek redress in court, he's making an opening that they should petition the government, and government will look at it and pass a judgment and do what is considered just to them. But he also wants to ensure that we gain from the stories that can be told. We must gain some insight into the factors that led to the judgment death in the first instance, and therefore take steps to ensure that in future we curb the incidents of that occurring, because he sees that as misapplication of scarce resources of state. And that is when he said that he believed that Ghanaians did require the services of all resources that are at their disposal, and any leakage that comes out of it should not be permitted.
Well, what kind of a campaign are we expecting? I mean, yes, you have been on the campaign trail for many years. What kind of a campaign are you expecting in this election?
I'm expecting a hot campaign, but I'm also expecting a campaign that will be controlled by the general aspirations of our people. Our people are now talking about violence-free campaign. Our people are talking about campaign devoid of the use and deployment of macho people. People are talking about campaign based on competition of ideas, campaigns based on withdrawal of insulting conduct and behavior. These seem to be the expectations of the general public. And therefore, swinging my sympathy to the side of the public, whose sentiments I share, I'm expecting that the campaign should be peaceful and event-filled. If it doesn't, I'm sure that the public that enunciated this standard of campaigning will pass their own judgments.
Have you checked your name in the voters' register?
I'm yet to do that.
Okay. When I was coming here today from the office, I told a friend of mine that I was coming to interview P.V. Obeng, and he said that, when is he going to write a book? So when are you going to write a book?
I'll write a book when I've commanded sufficient experience to put it down in writing.
But you already have it. You've been around for more than 25 years.
Thank you for the acknowledgement. I'll consider doing something about the request.
Thank you for your time, Uncle P.V.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.